to our webinar, Bringing Philanthropy and Impact Investing Together in Fighting COVID-19, Critical Imperatives in CSR, Tax and Cross-Border Charity Reforms with Indiaspora and Impact Investors Council. The session will be presented by Nishith Desai, Pratibha, Jain, Rahul, Rishi, Rangaswami, Kartik Desai, Ramraj and Ranjana, Khanna. To give our participants brief information about our partner organizations, Impact Investors Councils represents a strong, cohesive industry body of impact investors in India and is committed to increasing the flow of impact capital to India. It also aims to contribute to the growth of the industry by building knowledge resources, focusing on impact measurements and standardization, research and policy support, and self-regulation in the industry. Indiaspora is a non-profit organization established to transform the success of the Indian diaspora into meaningful impact worldwide. Indiaspora is a powerful network of diverse leaders from various professions who leverage their platform to build a stronger communities at home and abroad with a shared culture of strategic giving, inspiring social change. Please note that this session will be in listen-only mode and will last for about 60 to 90 minutes, out of which first 30 to 40 minutes will be spent on panel discussion. The remaining time will be available for Q&A for the participants. Requesting all the participants to be on mute mode for this session. You can post your questions in the chat window while the panel discussion is on. The moderator will queue up the questions for the speakers accordingly. Should you need any assistance during this call, you can use the chat option. Do note that this conference is being recorded. I now welcome our session presenter and moderator, Mr. Nishith Desai, founder, Nishith Desai Associates, Pratibha Jain, who heads NDA's Delhi office, and Rahul, Rishi, leader social sector practice at Nishith Desai Associates. Our guest speaker for this session, Mr. Rangaswami, is a software executive, investor, entrepreneur, and corporate eco-strategy expert, community builder, and philanthropist. He also works closely with Indiaspora, a US nonprofit, develop India-US Philanthropy Corridor. To develop India-US Philanthropy Corridor. Kartik Desai leads Asha Impact, an impact investing and policy advocacy platform operating a multi-family office founded by Vikram Gandhi and Pramod Bhasin for senior business leaders. UHNIs and philanthropists to invest in for-profit social enterprises. Asha Impact also engages with Indian government through sector-specific advocacy and creating new social financial instruments and markets through its non-profit arm, Asha Trust. Prior to co-founding Asha in 2014, Kartik has worked at two pioneering impact funds, Low Capital and Avishkar, and has an investment banker with DSP Merrill Lynch in Mumbai. Interned with Rockefeller Foundation and UNDP in US and Africa. Mr. Ramraj is a Chief Executive Officer at the Impact Investors Council. He has been credit market specialist with specialization in financial services and inclusion-related issues. Before joining IIC, Ramraj served as a president at Apr4SIII Limited and led them to set up an integrated business development function across businesses, focused on relationship management and deepening product penetration in banks, financial institutions covering India and emerging markets. Ranjana Khanna. Ranjana is a leading impact investor council in her capacity of director. She has been associated with IIC since May 2016 and managed the research and advocacy functions for the organization in initial few months. Ranjana, a management graduate from NDA, has 18 years of management experience, out of which major part is corporate banking across client orientation, corporate credit, risk and underwriting, and portfolio management. All participants are now requested to put your lines on mute mode. Over to you, Mr. Desai.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. everyone on the call. I know there are hundreds of people who have joined us today, and I'm very excited for that reason. First of all, our sympathies and hearts go out to the people who are trapped in the pandemic that we are seeing, and it's really a sorry stuff, to really go through. But we really sympathize with them, and but at the same time, uh, it seems that we also have an opportunity to contribute to the world, to shape the new world, and again, we can do ideation on how do we want to see the new world emerging. Right now, it seems to me that I'm sitting in Hawaii. Although I'm sitting in Mumbai, as a matter of disclosure, but we are seeing on the streets here peacocks. We are seeing other animals, and we have seen deers in Goregaon Park, and number of things. I also hear Delhi sky is looking blue. My colleague Pratibha, who is on the call today, this morning I heard her voice and I thought, oh, after several months, I found her voice to be very clear, good. I said, what happened? She said, all environment is so clean and nice here. Never before we have seen this in long period of time. So there are pluses to the whole thing, and now we are learning how to live a minimalistic life, and we also know what we can do without. And I think the whole mindset over a period of time would change. There's some sound coming. Can people put their phones on mute, please? Thank you. And in fact, I was just thinking that if this lockdown is carried forward forever, how would the world look like? And as I was telling, we see peacocks here. Just I'm at Nariman Point in the house, and we can see now dolphins here. Oh, there's some sound coming. I do not know where from. Um, okay, somebody looks like typing, but no problem. If you can. So it was to see dolphins in at Marine Drive and seeing peacocks at Babulnath and seeing deers in Goregaon and all that. I think it's a very different life. So I was just imagining that if a world goes virtual the way in which you're going today, it would make a lot of difference. In fact, as a law firm, we have decided to move towards becoming a virtual law firm in more measurable terms. That means almost 80% virtual and 20% physical. If there are 100 cars coming to the office, if 80 cars don't come, how much better the world would be. And a lot of things that we are doing in physical work can now be done through technology. So we have an opportunity to reimagine the world, change the whole mindset, the way in which you alluded so far. It's a great opportunity. Now, coming to the pandemic that we are seeing today, and the situation in which India and other countries are going through, uh, you know, there's so much we can do, and especially in the context of India, because this is India-centric discussion today. When we take a macro picture, we find that there are so many people who want to contribute to the society. They want to see the impact, and in the process, we have three different segments, at least three different segments. One is a philanthropy, one is CSR, and one would be impact investment. Now, all three have more or less common objective to create a better society, to create impact on the way in which we live. And today, all these three sectors are operating in different environment, regulatory in particular, and that causes, quite a bit of disconnect and the effect. How can we change? What are the things that we need to change all this regime? So we have more integrated approach to addressing the problems of the society. And it was in that context that we thought we'll put together this session. And this is, let us put it, this is the first of the several ones we'll be doing. Today we will be discussing more on a conceptual side. We'll take stock where we are, what's happening, and subsequently we will, for example, take tax issues of philanthropic or charitable trust, or the impact funds, or CSR and stuff like that, corporate law issues and stuff like that. So, and along with the industry experts, so all our experts are now at your disposal, and we have decided that we are going to contribute more and more to this education, as well as see how best we can help you. Uh, and this was a few words of introduction. I thought I'll give the objective is simple, that we want to change the world for the better and together. And with those words, maybe let me ask Rahul, who is my colleague and leads a social sector practice, to give you lay of the land for some of these events. And I would ask him to take over from now, and then I will intervene whenever he suggests I do. So, with those words, let me ask the request. Rahul, over to you now.
Thank you, Nishith bhai, for your introductory part. Hello, everyone. In light of COVID-19, we are currently at an inflection point, and we must understand that the entire ecosystem that we have on the impact and philanthropy side consists of multiple regulations, but three are important ones, which we'll also be discussing, during the course of our webinar. One would be in terms of dealing with laws related to impact investment, but at the same time, we also have laws relating to CSR and philanthropy, and for the entire ecosystem to grow and to expand, we need all these three laws to be coming together to be supplementary and complementary to each other. Now, given the current regulatory landscape we have in India with respect to philanthropy, with respect to impact investment, and with respect to CSR, unfortunately, these three laws work in silos. We have seen situations where impact investors want to tap into monies that CSR foundations have, or impact investors want to tap into monies that philanthropists have, but there's no cross linkages between these three ecosystems. So I think it's high time that in light of COVID-19, we revisit the laws that we have and understand to what extent can we untap those funds that are available within philanthropists or are available with CSR foundation or corporate foundations, and could there be a situation where we could use that money to make more impact investments? Currently, given the India's impact investment ecosystem, there are few sunshine sectors into which money goes. But in light of COVID-19, we do see a lot of scope for funding to be given more into small and micro enterprises. At the same time, we also see certain fundamental bottlenecks within the income tax act. For example, if today if today an organization runs a trust, and if the trust has certain monies, the trust is not allowed to make investments into sophisticated instruments. If it does so, it fears losing tax exemptions on that. So how would a trust be given access to capital market? Now, these are fundamental issues that we need to address, and at a more legal and regulatory level, we have to make sure that certain compatible laws are brought into picture so that there are cross linkages between all these three sectors. For example, if today a philanthropist gives money to an Indian non-profit, the way those monies are to be used by non-profits are very restricted. There cannot be any investments that can be made. There are restrictions in respect of onward granting that we see. There are tax disincentives that we also see. At the same time, this entire nature of social sector ecosystem is changing a lot. If we look at the model that US has or European nations have, their social enterprises have been allowed to scale up. Nature of entity that social enterprises in the US have are not purely non-profits, but they are a mix of for-profit as well as non-profit. So we need to have such sort of modeling in India as well, where our social enterprises are also made compatible in terms of receiving funding, not just in respect of equity, but equity as well as debt. A lot of social enterprises that we have in India, whether it could be in the form of a trust, a society, or an LLP, they are not very much compatible to receive a certain kind of fundings that another sort of organization can otherwise receive. So we, in light of the challenges that we currently see because of COVID-19, there is a tremendous scope for revisiting a lot of regulations that are applicable. We need to also understand what are the tax issues, what are investment specific issues that social enterprises face. At the same time, laws also need to be more compatible to allow social enterprises to gain more scalability, to have more commercial operations, to have more revenue. Under the Income Tax Act, if a social enterprises makes money, their tax comes into their tax exemption comes into question. So there's only so much of financial threshold that they can achieve. The same is also applicable in case of a trust or a society or a Section 8 company. Thankfully, within the impact investment landscape, we also have been seeing a lot of innovative financing. We have had social impact bond structure models that a few foundations and practiced in India. One example being the one carried out by Optimus Foundation in Rajasthan. So I think we also need a lot more social impact bond and innovative financing models to be coming in into India. And for that to happen, we need to have all different kinds of legal entities that form part of this entire ecosystem as stakeholders to be compatible in respect of law. There should not be any specific discriminatory way of treatment vis-a-vis law with respect to how a for-profit entity could scale up against how a non-profit entity could scale up, for the reason that for any impact to be giving more returns on the ground vis-a-vis social utility, we need to have more and more social enterprises that could be deployed on the ground, and we need to expand the nature of how these social enterprises are essentially going to be. So it's high time that we revisit laws in respect of this entire ecosystem that we have in hand. We revisit tax issues that non-profits face. We revisit how CSR money should be deployed. We should revisit and should push for policies wherein CSR money should also be allowed to be invested into AIFs, into social venture funds, so that we tap into those available funds, which currently in under India CSR regime, we have close to $2 billion that goes every year into these non-profits. These money either sit there idle or they are deployed on the ground. What if we link it closely with capital market? What if we link it closely with impacts that give us returns? If we do that, the level of impact that we have on the ground and the kind of glorification that social enterprises would have on the ground would actually be very much complementary to impact investors and their projects as well. So I think it's high time that foundations, private wealth, public government officials, we all come together and we devise a mechanism wherein the laws that we have become more compatible so as to allow more impact on the ground to tackle issues that we currently face. Yeah, I would now like to pass this on to Mr. Ramraj for his views on what are the recent trends in the impact investing space and how does he look at future scope within this sector. Over to you, sir.
I'm not there. Eman, would you like to speak? I think Ramraj is not speaking. Looks like, I don't know, connection problem or what. Yeah, Eman.
Hello, can you hear me? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, great. Good morning, good evening, everyone. This is Rangaswami with Indiaspora, and I would like to just bring everyone up to date on the philanthropy corridor between the US and India. Some of the facts: the US, every year, people in the US contribute about $400 billion to philanthropy. That's 400 billion with a B. This is probably the largest pool of money available worldwide to philanthropic causes. Yet at the same time, the amount of money that comes to India is a very, very small portion of this. So I think one of the things that we need to revisit in these tough times is to make the flow of philanthropic dollars from the US and other countries to India much more, I would say, stress free and easier to do. Of course, there have to be rules and regulations, but I think India has not yet really tapped the potential of dollars to come from the US to India. So if you look at this number, it's huge, and I think this can add a lot, especially in these tough times that the world is having. Many people in the US would like to contribute a lot more to India, but I think regulations are one area that need to be looked at on a fast track basis. I think the other area that needs to be really improved on is the trust deficit. When Indiaspora did a survey of people in the US and especially the Indian community in the US and why they give or don't give to India, one of the big reasons that came up was the trust deficit. They do not really trust Indian NGOs as much as they trust US NGOs. So I think India needs to overcome that with maybe better transparency and regulation. The third thing is a lot of Indians in the US remit money to India. I think US is the largest remitter of money in terms of people sending money back from work. Again, that could be another source of funds to be tapped. And finally, I think we need more role models, both in the Indian community here and in India, who are givers. And by doing all these things, I think we can improve the corridor and the flow of money between the US and India. And so those are, I would say, some of the options that we can do at this point in time. And so I want to basically kind of have a discussion as we go along with how do we improve these ties between the US and India, and how do we really work together on the COVID crisis. One of the big things that you may not be aware is Indian Americans are 1% of the US population, but we're 7% of the doctors in the US. This is a huge community that can also help India in this time of crisis. We have excellent pool of doctors in the US of Indian origin who very much would like to come to India and work with India and help their community at home as well. So there are many, many resources we can tap if we just put a focus, improve the regulations, improve the trust deficit, and really build this unique partnership between Indiaspora and the Indian American community and India. I will stop for now and we'll kind of come back as required. Nishith, thank you.
Thank you so much, Emma, for your wonderful remarks. And as you can see how much potential exists for US monies to come into India and US people to contribute, they might as well in terms of expertise or otherwise to India. I think all that we need to do is to facilitate the regulations, and Indian regulations concerning FCRA and other kind of impediments that exist. If we can just facilitate that, would create a very good roadmap, and all other countries have handled these situations. I think why India cannot harmonize laws and have similar laws so that we can do it. So it's a problem is not unique to India. So I would not take too much time away at this point in time. But would Ranjana, would you like to speak?
Nishith bhai, thanks for calling me in.
Right.
Yeah, hi everyone. Giving a little bit of perspective on as we all investing lies at the juncture of philanthropy and commercial investing, and what we call impact investing is that what the investing which is done with the objective of getting positive returns. So three things that are very critical are the intentionality, the sector focus and the beneficiary focus. When we're talking about benefiting the underserved populations of India, that is what these three are the must when we talk about impact investing. In the Indian context, we as an industry association are trying to build the ecosystem for impact investing in India through a range of activities like doing the research within the sector, doing policy advocacy, and doing the outreach of the sector to different kind of stakeholders like the the Indian government, and Indian investors, international investors, and so on and so forth. What we have, in this journey of ISE is now 5 years old, and in this journey of building the ecosystem, what we have seen is that the industry has evolved many-fold. If you look at the last decade of impact investing in India, in terms of size, we're about 10.5 billion of investments. And when we talk about these investments, these are largely equity investments because that's how we calculate the size of the industry. But what some of the important trends which are emerging are really that till back when we were talking about impact investing, we were talking largely about the MFI sector or the financial inclusion sector. But the way we see it now, in the last 5 years, a lot of other sectors have evolved. And India has truly come up with, an impact lab for the world where we can have very low cost solutions to whole range of social problems. And like I said, that a whole range of new sectors are emerging, like agriculture or education or energy access and waste to some extent. And so this has actually provided a lot of solutions to a whole range of problems. But what we see now at this point in time are really, I think, unprecedented times. Nobody could have envisaged a situation like what it is today. And the aftermath of COVID-19 is going to also pose a lot of significant challenges, not only for India but world as and India, which houses a huge population of more than 500 million underserved beneficiaries. This problem is going to be like many fold, and the amount of capital we need to address these kind of problems would also be significantly high. So in real terms, what we look at, a 10.5 billion industry is a significant size, but I would say that considering the size of the problems or the size of capital which will be required to tackle with the social issues, it will be 100 than currently have. So there is currently definitely a need for a lot of capital to come towards impact investing. When we look at the capital mix for impact investing, still 90% or more comes from international sources, and it still has a very small proportion of the capital. So I think that is also one of the things where we need to step in and look at the regulatory framework, how all the domestic capital provided more and can be motivated enough to invest more into the sector. CSR and philanthropy and impact investing together, I think, can provide a significant pool and lot of innovative solutions for all the problems which we are going to encounter in the post-COVID-19 kind of a situation, and that is we should aim to achieve in terms of through collaboration, more financing structures, and through different maybe policy interventions also, and see how all of these three pillars can come together. Over to you, Nishith bhai.
Oh, absolutely. So I
This
think,
is this is Ramraj. Can you guys hear me?
oh, Ramraj?
Yeah,
Yes,
I've
we
just
can.
come in,
Yes,
sir.
we
I
can.
Okay. Why don't you, I was about to invite Kartik to make comments, but now that you're on the line, we don't want to leave you. And thank you very much. I know you went through a lot of trouble joining us today.
No,
Uh,
not a problem,
please,
sir.
please go ahead.
I,
Give
I
us your
must,
valuable.
on a lighter note, I must thank my daughter because I didn't have a laptop. I had to snatch her laptop and take out her away from her online class to get onto this next. But nevertheless, let me just begin. I think Ranjana has given you an excellent perspective investing space. I want to talk about just quickly in the interest of time about 2 or 3 initiatives that we are trying to take today as impact investors in the light of COVID-19. And I think the areas which we are working on are 2-3-fold. I think 2-3 big initiatives. One, I would say, is that several of the foundations, whether it's Ford Foundation, whether it is Omidyar, whether it is Avishkar and others, they are setting up individual COVID-19 specific funds, all of which are trying to help and engage with companies which are trying to bring up solutions in the COVID-19 space, whether it is testing, whether it is protective equipment, whether it is in terms of critical care for patients. So one big agenda is really in trying to figure out what could be COVID-19 related solutions. I think that's one big piece. I think the second big piece, which is where we are trying to again use a lot of blended finance solutions, is really in 2 agendas that the impact sector is driving. The first is how do we support a lot of the workers who we have, which are more in the daily wage space, which are more in the gig economy space, the drivers, the Uber drivers, Ola drivers, all of these people. And the third is the startups and the small and medium enterprises. So what we are trying to do here is really create, what you could call a blended finance kind of fund. So the blended finance fund essentially has 2 components. There is a component which could be of grants, and there could be a component which is of regular debt. The way the structure works is that when you're lending out the money to the workers in the unorganized sector, or when you're lending out money to the small and medium enterprises under such an environment, obviously the risks of default could be high. So any lender normally will hesitate somewhat to take that to give that loan. But the idea is that there can be grant making foundations who could come and say, hey, you know what, you're going to give out $10 million, $20 million. I will give you $2 or $3 million as a grant. So against that $2 or $3 million, you can lend out $10 or $15 million. And whatever money is lent out by you, that $2 or $3 million of my grant will protect you to the extent of 15, 20, 30% default. So I think the blended finance is a big space where obviously we are trying to figure out whether we can use that technology to enable and help some of our financial institutions and some of our other NBFCs to support both the unorganized workers as well as the very small SMEs and startups which are going through a lot of trouble. I think the last point is really that we are trying to see whether we can raise emergency funding for a lot of startups, because a lot of these are high quality startups, but if they get into trouble and if they have a challenge with the next 3-4 months, they cannot sustain themselves. We are trying to see whether we can build an emergency funding kind of solution, which will essentially provide those startups with funding maybe for 3 or 4 months till they get back on track again. So I would say broadly, these are the 3 things which are trying to do. We are trying to execute this pretty quickly, but obviously, as you would appreciate, a lot of the devil lies in the detail. It's good to talk about this, and I'm sure I think if Pradeep is there from Ford or others later, I'm sure they will give more color on some of these agendas. But I think these are the 3-4 things that we've been trying. So with that sort of quick 3-4 minute agenda, let me stop and hand over to Kartik. I think Kartik is somebody unique who can give you a very rounded perspective from CSR, philanthropy, family office, impact investing. So over to you, Kartik.
Welcome.
Thank you very much, Nish. Hello, everyone. So just to build upon what Ramraj, maybe first, just to give a little bit of context about impact investment in healthcare. So as Ranjana said, roughly $10 billion has been invested over the last decade, from 2010 to 2020, in impact investment. And here we're just talking about the for-profit market return piece. So we're not talking about philanthropy, blended finance, and we're not talking about ESG. We're only talking about equity. And roughly 10% of that are of impact investment. And this is mostly in pharmacy, but also in areas like diagnostics, decision support, secondary care, and so on. So, this is definitely an area where impact investors have been quite active. Now, coming to this crisis, needless to say that globally, the venture capital industry, and in India as well, and the business community more broadly, has acted very, very sharply. One, as Ramraj mentioned, many VC funds have set up COVID-specific funds, both to provide bridge financing to their own portfolio companies, as well as to make specific investments in COVID-related solutions. I should make the point that, look, many of these social impact enterprises use technology to work with low-income people. So ultimately, they are a critical part of the solution, because what are the two things that sort of India or developing countries need right now? One is service delivery to these low-income people who are being very, very badly affected in terms of reduced incomes, reduced access to services. The social enterprises, by definition, do that, and often they do it, through technology. So just to give you one example, there's many farmers who buy their inputs on agri-input apps, like AgroStar, Gramophone, Behat, and so on. So this is actually a product which, in the era of social distancing, just like we can sit at home and order a basket or so on, why can't a rural farmer also be ordering agricultural products online? So there's a lot that social enterprises have to offer, not just in the area of healthcare, for that matter, waste management. So there's a lot that the industry is doing specifically with respect to supporting these social enterprises, right? You guys would have heard about the VC Founders Fund and specific funds like Charate, Omidyar, Startup India. There's even now parliamentarians and venture capital group that's been formed with some parliamentarians and some VCs like ourselves to come up with specific startups and solutions and push them to specific state governments. So this is broadly what's happening. But just to conclude specifically on the topic of the seminar, and what are the 5 things that impact investors, philanthropists, that all of us can do collectively as folks who are interested in social finance. So as Ramraj said, point number 1 is blended finance. Blended finance basically means combining philanthropy, equity, and debt in innovative ways. And this is absolutely the right time to do that. India was already going through a bit of an inflection point on social impact development impact bonds, with about a dozen or so under development. But this is going to take a lot of attention now. USAID has already announced a $100 million blended finance facility for COVID. We at Asha are looking at some folks at, for example, risk capital to skilled healthcare workers, which is desperately needed right now. People trained as and outcome funding to pay for that. So generally, the use of blended finance is, I think, one big area. Second is, as Ramraj said, one thing that all of us can collectively do is provide support to migrant, low-income workers who are already and are very, very badly affected by this. This is not just food in the short income support for 3 to 6 months. As Ramraj was saying, Forward and others spoken about this, structures on the like a loan given to one of these migrant families with this 3-month principal moratorium, and after that, we start back. If they're a gig economy worker working for Uber, Ola, you have their information based on which you can underwrite them. How to do this for the lower segment, like rickshaw pullers and so on, would require more philanthropic efforts. So using NBFCs, using structured debt to provide cash in the hands of these low-income workers. Thirdly, is supporting those social enterprises which are doing useful things to under. So it's actually bridge financing, right? Particularly on the debt side. So again, a variety of DFI foundations, impact investors are looking precisely at that. Fourthly, I think leaving aside enterprises or financial structures, I think one also has to make a case for NGOs. One of the biggest implications and challenges of this crisis is going to be community health, right? As this disease spreads in certain pockets and you have certain outbreaks, particularly in crowded areas or low-income areas, how are we going to respond to that? Do community isolation, descend in teams, and so on. That cannot be done just by the state. So there's a lot of NGOs who have a tremendously important role to play in spreading awareness and using technology, and so on. So I think that also has to be very, very. And fifth, and this is kind of like a larger point, and others have made this extremely well, and there's a lot of talk at global level also happening on this, that this is basically an overall pivot point for impact investing in conscious capitalism, right? Many people already, as Nishith pointed out, are sitting at home, being productive on their laptops and looking at nature outside and all of the socioeconomic crises that we're facing. And people are really rethinking some of these fundamental assumptions. So already we knew that impact investing, philanthropy, and a more sort of ethical way of doing business is probably the right way of going about it. So I think, on that note, I'll stop. And thank you for setting this up, NDA.
Thank you so much, Kartik, for very nice comments, very provoking and very educative as well. In fact, you rightly said that, we have to now look at different ways of addressing the problem that we are in. And what I'd like to do for a moment is to bring in Pratibha, my colleague, Pratibha Jain, and she is the leader of regulatory practice as well, based out of Delhi. So I think she is a key leader in the ecosystem and who can become a bridge to between the regulators as well as the. So I think, Pratibha, can I ask you to make some comments?
Sure, Nishbhai, thank you. And thank you all the other panelists for very insightful comments. Just taking on from where the other panelists left, and specifically, the 5 pillars that Kartik was talking about, that's going to help us through COVID and post-COVID, that we need to be cognizant of. Let me just take them one by one in terms of, what from a regulatory perspective and the Indian ecosystem I see are going to be essentials. As Ranjana pointed out, with IIC, with organizations like Indiaspora, we've been in communication with the government in terms of seeing how we can expand the breadth and the depth of impact investment and philanthropy granting in India. That has just become imminent now. Earlier, while these were discussions, now, especially as what we've seen in the last few days with organizations that are scaling up, for example, that are in the front line of fighting the current pandemic, whether making masks, making PPE, feeding the migrant laborers. A lot of organizations are coming up and wanting to scale up to provide these services. But they just don't have the necessary regulatory approvals or the legal help to get those regulatory approvals. And with everybody sitting at home, if you don't have an ATG exemption already, if you don't have an FCRA license, the funding that you can actually access becomes limited. So I think we have to look at a very short-term solution with the government, and then a medium-term solution, and then a long-term solution. And in the short term, I think what we're discussing with the government is just creating a window where as soon as we see grant money coming into India, as MR mentioned, if we are looking at, even the Indian diaspora giving money back to India, as soon as possible, we provide a window to provide FCRA approvals for COVID-specific grants. And, these can be audited post facto, but right now, in good faith, these grants have to come into India. Similarly, a window for tax exemptions where the money is being used for COVID purposes. You also will need, as both Ranjana and Kartik mentioned, the investments till date have been in equity. And we really need to scale up on the debt side. Even though we have these micro-lending NBFCs that have been doing that work on the ground with poor families and with middle-income families, the funding they get is typically in equity. And to create new NBFCs takes anywhere between 6 to 12 months. We don't have that kind of time period. So again, special windows will have to be created, and maybe even SEBI will need to create structures where we can pool money for in the form of debt to provide onward lending, and similarly on the RBI side. So I think as an industry, while we come up with innovative solutions, whether it's on blended finance, whether it's on lending, whether it's on NGOs working in the front line, we will need to simultaneously work with the regulators to provide some of these windows as soon as possible, and work on that consultation with them very quickly as to ensuring that the trust deficit, again, that Mr. mentioned, it's both at the donor level and at the regulator level. So that we will have to address for the trust deficit also. So the industry will have to come together and ensure that we can give that trust to the regulators that we will take care of all of these issues post facto in terms of ensuring that the money was used where it was meant for. On that note, let me just bring in, we do have with us today many other folks who are dialed in, who are industry experts, and I think it would be useful to hear from them. I see Mr. Pradeep from Ford Foundation has dialed in. If we can unmute his line. Mr. Pradeep, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Hi.
Yeah, very well. Welcome, Pradeep. Nishith here.
Hi, Nishith. I was on and off listening to most of the conversations so far, starting with yours and then Mr's. And Mr, I was really looking forward to the May event. Unfortunately, I'm guessing it's not going to happen, at least in person. I should say to Nishith's earlier point about how the skies are clear, for what it's worth, Mr, I should say Delhi now looks almost as beautiful as the Bay Area. So, and this is, it's very rare you'll hear anyone ever say that.
Yes.
So I will take pictures and send it to you personally, Mr, just to prove to you that what I'm saying is actually true.
Thank you, Pradeep.
Yes. So I think most of you have said and covered everything. I can just very briefly tell you what we've been doing, and I think I've heard several of you describe the kind of things that all of us can do as organizations. So we've kind of dividing what we can do into three phases. Phase one, we've decided, is all grants and support that we can do that's immediate and directly addressed for any activities that are quote unquote relief. Phase two, we think will be at least 1 month from now, also, which will fall into the relief categories, but where we think it might look slightly different from what it looks like today. And what I mean by that is what we see as the most urgent issues for relief today, whether it's the economic crisis that the migrants are facing, the social security issues that the informal sector is facing, and so on and so forth. We're not certain that those might still be the top priorities 1 month from now. So we're saying that in phase two, we will address whatever we see as the most important, quote unquote, relief related issues 1 month from now. That's phase two. And then phase three is the kind of support that we think we will be prepared for 2 or 3 months from now, hopefully, assuming that 2 or 3 months from now, everything somewhat goes back to normal. And in the phase three, we plan to do more of resilient related grants and funding support. So that's how we're dividing our work right now. And in the first category, for us, the big criteria is what is it that we can roll out immediately, right? And by immediate, we mean literally in the next 2 weeks. So we found that the easiest way to do that is, of course, go and work with partners who we already have funds or grants to, because they give us direct access to some of these constituencies that we want to help, whether it's women who we feel are being disproportionately affected by this crisis, or whether it's the low-wage workers without social security benefits. So fortunately for us, we have a wide network of grantees who have direct access to them. See, one of the challenges also of supporting them is something that we got to keep in mind is, given the lockdown that we have in place, it's sometimes physically impossible. If, let's say, one of the helps what we want to do is to get cash in the hands of low-wage workers through CSOs that we can actually help support, we should also remember that the CSOs themselves might not be able to physically distribute cash to these workers because of the lockdown that's in place. So we're also using that as a criteria for deciding whom to support and give money to, because there are some organizations that have a pretty decentralized structure that is enabling them to get, whether it's cash or food supplies or whatever it is, to the people who really need it. So we're also using that as a criteria for actually deciding who to support. Secondly, we are partnering with organizations. I think someone earlier mentioned how we have, organizations like us and Omidyar and Dell Foundation. Geeta couldn't be on the call, so she asked me to share their views also. So we're actually partnering with organizations like those. Initially, we decided to initially our thought was we'll create pooled funds with them. But then we decided just creating a pooled fund doesn't mean anything unless that's used for a specific proposal. And just the nature of how some of our organizations are structured in India, and again, I think Nishith and a few others spoke to that, if we just create a pool fund without earmarking where the money will go, it creates some legal challenges for international organizations like ours. So whereas the idea of a pool fund sounds very nice and romantic, we realized that the way to really move things forward beyond a pool fund is actually specific proposals that then a few donors can pool their cash on, right? So the difference between a pool fund and actually a proposal where a bunch of us come together and put money, I think the latter is legally easier to do, and also it's easy to just execute. So we already started doing that with Omidyar, Dell, and with USAID, where I think it was Pratibha who mentioned that you're not seeing much of debt, but we're also trying to do debt there, not just equity. So we're trying to do debt. And again, I'm sure some of you, especially the legal folks on the call, will appreciate that there are challenges even within the FCRA of international USD dollars being used to actually give support in cash or kind. It's something that we're still struggling with. We are working with a bunch of lawyers, Nishith, just for your knowledge, including lawyers like Luthra who are, I believe, working with MHA and a few ministries to exactly see if we can make an exception for this, because some of our CSOs are struggling with this particular way of supporting their constituencies. And the last point I want to make is, we're very open to ideas that go beyond the quote unquote normal way of grant making, right? And this is where we are exploring, whether instruments like debt guarantees that can actually be used to leverage by banks or NBFCs for a larger capital. We're open to all ideas. But for us, what is critical now is, like I said, because we are focusing on phase one, what is critical is that we get things on the ground as soon as possible. And it's easier said than done, because when we had a lot of proposals, but when we actually went how actually you could follow up and get cash, let's say, to people on hand, is when we realized that it's going to be a challenge given the lockdown and all of that. So even though it sounds like you might have a lot of proposals that might address the immediate relief issue, when you actually drill down on it, there are very few that actually do give us the possibility of, whether it's giving food or cash or something. We're also exploring partnerships with VCs and funds, whether it's Vani and the work that she's doing through Kalari, or I think someone also mentioned Chirate, as funds. We're also exploring possibilities where we could provide them grant to address issues that their startups are facing. So that's also something that's happening. But there also our message to them has been that please give us actual proposals in which you tell us very specifically what is it that you want us to do, rather than just giving us this broad picture of let's collaborate, let's create a pool fund, which we are realizing is just not the easiest way to get something off the ground. And I'll just stop there in case anyone has any comments or questions. And thank you so much, Nishith and team, for putting this together. I think it's very useful for all of us to get on the same page and just exchange learnings and lessons in this truly challenging and very unique times.
Pratibha,
Right.
just a very quick follow-on question. How are you disseminating the information? Because what we are seeing is also an information mismatch in terms of people who are looking for funding versus funders like you.
Yeah, no, it's been a challenge. And as we speak, just this morning, and I'm not exaggerating, I had 4 calls in 4 separate networks. We're all making a case for why that network is different from others. Right. And these are all network of organizations coming together, whether it's only donors, whether it's donors and CSOs, whether it's donor CSOs, blah, 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 whatever, in all different categories. That's been a challenge for you. And, one of the proposals today was that when all of this settles down, we actually need a very strong coalition, almost like a council of philanthropy.
Pradeep, we just lost you.
We had set out on a project last year to exactly address this by getting the help of an organization called Candid and OECD and all to see if we can organize the structure here in India. It is not easy. It's not at all easy. So that has been a big challenge for us. I mean, honestly, I don't have an easy answer for you except that we're all, 80% of our time today is exactly spent on that when it's not the most efficient way to spend our time, right? We're having a lot of our folks all on calls and networks, each one saying our idea is better than the other. So we are lacking that. But honestly, I don't think that it's ever going to fix, and maybe it's not the best way to spend any of our time moving forward. I think this notion of having one solid platform where everyone comes together, and I just don't think it is the Indian way of doing things. I don't think, and I think in fact, even imagining that that's what we all got to put our resources in to create that structure, I think it's just maybe as just a personal view that it's just not the best use of everyone's time, but it's been a challenge for us. So the easiest way for us is to go with people who we are familiar with, friends, 2-3 degrees of separation. And fortunately for us, we have a good network and people who we can pick up the phone and say, what do you guys think about this? So we have been going with, people like Rupa and Geeta and others whom we really know and who we really trust. And, Ashish, the Nilakenis, all who have very solid proposals that they have sent. And they said, let's just collaborate on those.
And Nishith, you were mentioning something?
No, all that I was trying to say that thank you very much, Pradeep. You all have been doing a wonderful job and we are all here to help you. And the whole idea today is to put, top luminaries like you all and bring them on one platform, if not on one table, and see what we can do together. If there are legal or other impediments, then we as lawyers and tax professionals are here to help you. And once you tell us an objective, I think it's not always that you have to have one pulling vehicle. We can create another kind of a platform where everybody's objectives can be brought together, and at the same time, they're able to report to their respective jurisdictions in the way in which they are required to do. So I would quickly like to request Jinesh. I believe you have joined and you've been there for some time, but before you start, let me tell all the participants that because for technical reasons, we had to delay the start of the meeting. So we'll extend up to 10:30. There is a lot to talk, at least at this level. Of course, we're taking segment-wise approach in week after week. And then we're getting into more specifics. But today, let us have high-level issues discussed. So can I ask Jinesh, are you there on the call or on the platform?
Yes, I am
Wonderful.
there.
Thank you, Jinesh, joining us. And then Rishi will tell you something about impact investing as well. So Jinesh, over to you.
Yeah, hi everyone. I run Omnivo Fund, and we've been focusing on the rural markets. COVID's like a big issue in the urban areas, and I think it's getting transmitted across the country. But when we look from the rural perspective, I think, and we focus on the farmer segment, people don't realize it that the farmers currently have been facing an issue where the entire harvest is ready, but because of the lockdown, because of the logistics issue, they are unable to harvest it and also unable to find the right buyers at the right price point. So while we all talk about COVID and looking at the health aspect, I think in a country like India, we shouldn't forget about the poor people because uh, it's not the health. I mean, we might be able to survive the virus impact, but if the economy is not able to grow in the start functioning in a normal manner, and people are not able to transport their produce from the rural India to the urban India, I think we might have a much graver crisis than just the COVID crisis. I think while the entire every stakeholder is talking about the COVID thing, we at Omni are looking saying how do we solve this problem because the world has to move on. COVID will get resolved in next 2 months. We will have things in control. But if the rural economy fails apart, right? If the producers are not able to sell the produce and get the right price point, I think we are looking for a bigger problem, and we've been trying to figure out how to do about it. We've been talking to the government, we've been talking to various stakeholders, but I think it looks like most of the focus is right now on the urban India and trying to solve the healthcare issues. I mean, we really worry about that piece, and I don't know how the foundations and how the philanthropies or how the other stakeholders can look at this aspect because I think when we have to solve the problem, we need to look the problem as a holistic manner. I mean, that's what I want to tell about from the rural perspective, which probably in the last 60 minutes of discussion, I don't think anyone spoke about that.
Jinesh, that's a very valid point. Is there specific ideas you have in terms of this industry coming together for as resolution of that problem?
I think the problem is that the government has been talking about things like helping farmers to sell the produce beyond the mandis. Uh, I think if the stakeholders can start focusing on saying that can we have farmers reach out to the end consumers to like people like grofers or Amazon or the large guys and help the consumers get the produce directly from the source, which in turn will also probably reduce the issues of transmission of bad produce from the farms to the consumers, and solve the issues of transparency and traceability might also be relevant. uh, I think if the stakeholder we can start talking about the consumer awareness of eating healthier and better food across the value chain, that might be more relevant. It's more like amplification of what is really required. I mean, that is what we think in this crisis will be relevant.
Yeah, absolutely. And probably a tech solution that enables that direct linkage and the transparency and the connectivity with the direct users.
Yeah, that's important, but let's see how it goes. I mean, we don't have clear answers on that. We're trying to figure it out ourselves.
Absolutely. If Rishi, you wanted to come in on some of these issues?
Sure. So, I just wanted to share some very recent experience where one of the aggregators wanted to sort of set up a platform where they could sort of help their stakeholders who are literally no longer able to get the cash flows that they were looking at on a daily basis. Now, again, obviously, I completely agree with the pooling platforms which are existing out there, the, the time lag and the efficiencies out there. So we thought of putting together a structure which involved an NBFC, MFI sort of a situation where that NBFC could provide micro credits to the stakeholders who obviously range in 100,000 plus in number. But at the same time, to make sure that the NBFC is motivated and there are lining up of commercials accordingly, the objective also was that they could approach some of the larger corporates who sort of agree with the platform, who could provide a guarantee that in case there was a default at the borrower level, the lender could obviously look at the guarantors who would then sort of step in. So without having a cash outlay upfront, this sort of a back-to-back guarantee model could perhaps help an MFI or an NBFC who is looking to sort of advance a microcredit to a stakeholder. That's one of the options that we explored. The other option was revolving around a Section 8 type situation where you could have corporates who could give grants, you could have corporates who could perhaps look at their CSR allocations to sort of give a grant to a Section 8. And the Section 8 could always look at a sub-account type model within their structure so that any grantor would know what is the end use of the grant that they're giving. It could either be tied to one broader objective or it could be a slightly micro objective, depending on what the grantor's sort of wish was. And there could be very effective tracking mechanisms, monitoring platforms, and so on and so forth. So you could, as a grantor, make sure that the outlay that you incurred is going to the right channels and to the right sort of situations that you had originally earmarked. Now, again, these are structures which are out there. These are not licenses that can be obtained overnight. So these sort of platforms are designed around existing players, existing Section 8s, existing NBFCs, existing MFI NBFCs, so that you can roll out a product as soon as possible. And the beauty of this is that these are very, very fungible. You don't need to sort of be tied up with one particular NBFC or a Section 8. They are across different geographies who have different specializations. Some specialize in pulling up larger corporates, some more on the retail side. But a healthy mix of this do exist, and we were obviously very pleasantly surprised when this aggregator approached us and we could come up with a solution over a couple of days. And hopefully we should be able to roll this out by early next week itself.
Thanks, Rishi. It's an extremely good situation for the short-term issues that we've been talking about, specifically around licensing and getting approvals for the structures that we typically, take months or years to create. But again, it's a short-term solution, and I think the quicker that conversation, as an industry, we can have. And to Pradeep's point of, one law firm reaching out. We've been in touch with the Home Ministry too, but I think what this will require is a much more quicker concerted effort rather than people reaching out individually, because you will need to give, even before this crisis started, there was a huge amount of distrust as far as the ministry was concerned with respect to this particular sector, which cannot be bridged in the short term. So we will need to, provide them solutions for them to be able to give us some of these exemptions. With that, let me just ask if the panelists have any last quick thoughts before we open it up for questions.
Yes, Rahul this side. So on the FCRA bit, I just wanted to add one more point. So the way we have the compounding regime under FEMA, we also have compounding provision under FCRA, which is Foreign Contribution Regulation Act. But surprisingly, so far, no cases on delinquency has been compounded by the Home Affairs. So I think it's high time that Home Affairs starts making FCRA more democratic, in the sense of making it more liberal, so that NGOs that do end up being on the delinquent side, or being do end up contravening certain provisions of FCRA for certain reasons, it could either be due to capacity building or due to lack of funds or resources. I think that would be a good step, so that a good administrative essence that FEMA has can also be imbibed within FCRA, and that's how organizations can use such compounding provisions to get rid of their minor non-compliances and start following provisions of law, and also start building trust vis-a-vis MHA. That's one low-hanging fruit which the Home Affairs can certainly look at and be more proactive about.
Absolutely.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, Amarti. Yes, Pradeep, please go ahead.
Yeah, no, since Rahul brought up FCRA and Nishith also mentioned it earlier, I want to just point out, since quite a few of you are lawyers, see, one of the things that we had requested help from lawyers to help clarify is within FCRA, this form FC4, right? I think it used to be FC6, and there's, I think, the new one that, and I'm sorry for the details for those who might not be interested or know what I'm talking about, but since you brought up FCRA, I'm bringing it up. So the current, there's a form FC4, which kind of, I think, replaced FC6, which was what are the permissible activities that a FCRA registered organization can and cannot do, whether it's supply of free medicines, whether it's humanitarian aid and relief and all of that. So I think that's one provision. If you can help with more clarity, many donors like us are actually not sure whether when we support organizations with grants, if that money can be used by those grantees for that, because the provision which used to be before, which was FC6, clearly listed out what you can and cannot do. The new one, FC4, does not. And it's a gray area that many CSOs seem to be struggling with. And as a result of which donors are also in the dark. And of course, our concern is that, today we might say it's fine because it's the gray area, it's okay. But these are exactly the kind of things that comes back to bite us 2-3 years from now, as you all might appreciate. So anyway, I just want to leave it there, not necessarily to debate or argue in this conversation, but just something for us to take away and see if we can work on.
Hi, this is MR Rangaswamy. I just want to add on, Pradeep, thank you for that great update. I just wanted to say that there are a lot of donors in the US who are looking specifically for projects that make an impact with the migrant worker community. Can food and other supplies be given to them? And so just throwing it out there, if you know of good organizations today that are doing that, we'd love to hear from those of you in the know. So thank you.
Thank you. We have very little time left, so we'll go straight to questions. Pradeep, on your question, we'll get back to you on one-on-one because, instead of trying to get a clarification right now, I think one possible way is to just ask for waivers on penalties for this period, right? That's what we are doing with the other regulators, and that's what we are suggesting to all regulators. Like, this is not the time. This is the time where you have to ensure that people can go and do the right stuff. Can we just open up for questions? I see a question from Kartik Tyagi on what are the key entrepreneurial social issues we can identify for purposes of impact investing. This is to any of the panelists, if anybody wants to take it up. Ramraj, if you're still on, can I ask you to jump in on, what are the key issues that you're seeing in a COVID situation?
Can you just repeat that question, please? Sorry.
The key entrepreneurial social issues we can identify for the purposes of impact investing.
Yeah, I think so I have to really look at it at two levels. One is at the macro level of general impact investing and in the present situation. So obviously the present situation, brings serious leadership challenges for entrepreneurs, especially social entrepreneurs, primarily because of the nature of their work. What do you do in a situation where there's a huge amount of demand compression? What do you do with your people? Salaries, someone has to pay for all this. There's already stress in general in terms of uncertainty. So the regular kind of stuff is what it is. But I think in the longer run, really there is a greater need for us to really, if I may say, celebrate and, really, bring a culture where social entrepreneurship gets its due and it is seen as something which is very integral to the larger social fabric of this country. And I think that's something which is very important. And I would believe that, different forms of public policy interventions which support social entrepreneurship in the country, whether it is through, benefits, whether it is through incentives, whether it is through tax breaks. Social stock exchange, for example, is a classic situation in which a unique kind of, environment is being created for social entrepreneurship. So I think we need to do a lot more to see how this sector can, receive its, appropriate sort of recognition and position in society, so that more people who are interested in areas like this can actually get in and do stuff rather than, go for traditional jobs or whatever else it is, and their heart is not, where they would like it to be. That's a very long-winded answer to the question.
Just to add, Nishith here, just to add here one thing for the information of all. Yesterday, we launched a new initiative called Founders 101, particularly to deal with this kind of issues, along with Thai and Indian Angels, network. And of course, all of you are welcome to be on that. So what we have done is, first of all, yesterday we took up issues such as what is called force majeure. Now, a lot of entrepreneurs have rental places, as you said, they have to pay salaries. What can they do with that? The force majeure can apply or not apply. So a lot of those kind of questions, labor law compliances, and many other things that come in. So we have been addressing those issues in a law firm, and with Thai, we have created this forum or a platform called Founders 101, and all of you are welcome to look at next week our educational program on Thursday between 12 and 1. We'll be having this session, and we'll send you more information on that as well. So that's one part of the game. And secondly, that today we are not able to take all the questions, but we miss Geeta Goyal and also from Bell Foundation and Vivek Pandit, both good friends. But next time, I think I'm sure we're going to have them. But there are a lot of issues that are coming up. Go ahead then. If there's any other question, I think there's some last question.
Yeah, there are two more questions. One is on the checks and balances that can be effectively implemented in the cases where a philanthropist tries to divert the funds through lawful means by resorting to the relaxed investment policies. I think we discussed it. Just in the interest of time, I think in this time and period where getting the funds into the economy is more important. I think some amount of amnesty schemes with audits post facto might be a better solution than very strict policies right now. But that's something that we will have to work through with the regulators.
One point I would like to make here, sorry for my interruption, the entire approach that we have to the, to the citizens is that even as a government, we have to begin process of trust. There will be always some black sheep, number one. And now lot of developed countries have handled this situation. Okay. And we are not unique to that. People may try to do one or the other. Sometimes, if it's, as you said, if it's a lawful means and it's illegal within the framework, then I think something needs to be done about it. But you cannot draft and cannot develop all your policies based on suspecting that all citizens are going to be cheap. I think that is fundamental gap in trust as a trust deficit. I think we have to move towards that little bit. If you don't have a liberal approach, you will always continue to suspect everyone, and then creates a complete mess for 99% of the people and one because of the fault of 1%. But of course, I'm not justifying what anybody does, but at the same time, I think the approach to thinking needs to change, and particularly at a point of time like this, we don't have time to get into those things, And if anybody is caught doing wrong thing, take it and set a good example.
Absolutely, Nishith.
Pratibha, if I may just add one point I missed out during my last conversation. So one important aspect we have seen under the draft CSR rules is that the proposed law now excludes trusts and societies as recipient NGO partners, and it gives precedence to a Section 8. So that a trend which a lot of companies have got feedback from. A lot of philanthropy organizations have reached out to us, and they have said that this is a huge concern, because as of now in India still trust and societies are in huge numbers when compared to Section 8. And if this draft policy goes through, then it would would not be in a position to pass the litmus test of constitutionality, because the government is proposing to, it seems they are proposing to create a class within a class in respect of how non-profit. So I think in the longer run, even for the philanthropy ecosystem, the draft rules need to be debated broadly, and due representation should also go to the ministry in terms of going about it in a right manner.
Thanks, Rahul. We have just 5 minutes left, so I'll quickly take the last question. Is from Aditya Paul on the panel sharing their view on impact investment into unregulated retail sector, Kirana stores, especially when bigger retailers are driving them out of business. Kartik, if you're still there, do you want to take this question?
Sure. So look, guys, good question. In informal sector has been very, very badly hit. Many of these kirana shops are under the Essential Commodities, the Essential Services Act. But they're taking a hit, and the employees there as well. So this is not the lower income segment of the population, and the SME industry is facing a huge shock because of this. So I think there's a lot of actions required to support them, but by that same token, many of the NBFCs, these folks, would have seen an article in the Khanna just today, which talked about how Ninja Cart, which sources food from all the farmers and works with many of these kirana, is actually doing pretty well in this crisis. So yes, certainly it's an area of concern. With these initiatives that the industry is taking, NBFCs and startups, we will hopefully see these kirana shops, come back to normal.
Thanks, Kartik. That's all the questions we had for today. Is there any final comments we have?
Yes, I think first of all, thank you for being in this panel. So many of you have joined, and it's really exciting. And also on the participant side, hundreds of people have joined. I think what is happening in this session is that we are all coming together, not to form an organization, not to do something, but start with changing ideas and find solutions. So it's a amorphous group that has come into being, looks like today. And all the organizations, Indiaspora, IIC, and other ones that are there out, all of us, we can continue to discuss. Some ideas would come out to solve problems. At least we know what the problems are. And then each one can find a solution. To the extent to which all of us can come together and do something, obviously a new platform can be created. But I think we have a great opportunity in front of us, in spite of the fact that we are passing through a very bad crisis, to do something good and something interesting and something exciting. And I really want to thank everyone once again, MR, Kartik, Pratibha, Rahul, Ranjana, Ramraj, Rishi, everyone who spoke, Pradeep, and we missed a lot of friends. I think they are all there, but at the same time couldn't have everyone talk. But I hope this has been useful exercise at a very high level. We'll continue to now get into more specific sessions, maybe week after week, and see, okay, on FCRA, what is the right thing to do? On tax, what is the right thing to do from our perspective? And what are the corporate law, like Section 8 company, which has been made mandatory. Now, again, it has corporate law has too many complications, and many firms are existing for a long period of time in the form of trust societies and other ones. So, some of these issues are not necessary at this point in time to be regulated by the government. It's more focus is let us do right things rather than getting into what form or otherwise. But I think broadly, this is what it is for today. And it's exactly 10:30. Thank you very much for being patient. Sorry for the technical issues that we went through. And see you again, and keep on looking at our cCep platform, and we'll engage you and let you know more about it as you. Tomorrow we'll receive next week's program. Thank you so much.